The night my mother-in-law handed me a box of my own clothes and said, "This house was never yours to begin with." My husband had been dead for 11 days. 11 days. I had barely stopped shaking. My hand still reached for his side of the bed at 3 in the morning. His coffee mug was still in the dish rack. I hadn't been able to wash it. And she was standing in the hallway of the home I had shared with my husband for 4 years, holding a cardboard box of my winter sweaters folded on top, looking at me like I was a tenant who had overstayed a lease. "I've already spoken to the attorney," she said. "The house is in Philip's name. It transfers to his estate, which means it transfers to us. You have until the end of the week." She didn't raise her voice. That was the thing about her. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. "My name is June. I was 27 years old when my husband died. He had a heart condition he hadn't told me about until 8 months into our marriage. And even then he'd said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, like he was telling me about a dent in the car. The doctors say I manage it fine. It's not something we need to worry about every day. And I had believed him because he was 31 and healthy and laughed too loud at bad movies and made the best scrambled eggs I'd ever had in my life. He collapsed on a Tuesday morning in the parking lot of a grocery store. A stranger called the ambulance. I got the call at work. By the time I got to the hospital, there was nothing to get to. For those first 11 days, my mother-in-law, Vivian, had been around constantly, organizing the funeral, calling relatives, accepting casseroles at the door. I had let her take over because I couldn't breathe, let alone make decisions. I thought she was holding us both together. I thought we were grieving the same person. I was wrong. What I didn't know then, what I would learn piece by piece over the following months, was that Vivienne had never considered me part of the family. Not really. I was the woman Philip had chosen over her objections. She'd wanted him to marry a girl he dated in college, someone from the same county in Virginia, someone whose family she already knew. Instead, he'd met me at a conference in Austin, and 6 months later we were engaged, and she had smiled through the rehearsal dinner and hugged me at the altar and whispered something to Philip during the reception that made him go quiet for a moment before he shook his head and came back to me with a smile. I never asked him what she said. I should have. When she handed me that box, I stood in the hallway and said nothing for what felt like a very long time. My mind was running through calculations, not grief, not rage, just raw survival. I had $2,300 in my personal checking account. My job was in marketing at a mid-sized firm in Richmond, Virginia. I made decent money, but we had merged most of our finances when we got married, and I didn't know yet what was tied up in the estate and what wasn't. I said, "Vivienne, I'm his wife. I need to speak to the attorney myself." She said, "You're welcome to. I've included the contact information in the box." She had a business card tucked between my sweaters. She had planned this. I took the box. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed we had shared, and I stared at the wall and I thought, she is not going to do this to me. I don't care what it takes. I called my older sister that night. Her name is Ren, and she lives in Charlottesville, and she is the kind of person who, when you call her crying at 11 at night, doesn't say, "Calm down," or "It'll be okay." She says, "Tell me exactly what happened. Don't leave anything out." And then she listens. She listened for a long time. "Come here," she said when I was done. "Come here tonight. Bring whatever fits in your car, and come here." I did. I packed 2 suitcases and the coffee mug. I did wash it, finally, because I needed it to be clean if I was going to keep it. And I drove the 45 minutes to Ren's house in the dark. She met me on the porch. She didn't say anything. She just took one of the suitcases out of my hand and held the door open. I slept in her guest room for the next 3 months. The attorney confirmed what Vivienne had said. The house was in Philip's name alone. Something we had talked about changing but never gotten around to because we had had time. We'd had so much time. His estate, after debts, was divided according to Virginia law, which did include me as a spouse. But Vivienne's name was on accounts I hadn't known about, and the legal process was slow and expensive. And every time I pushed, there was another document, another complication, another phone call from her attorney that cost me money I didn't have. I kept going to work. I drove the 45 minutes from Ren's house to my office in Richmond every single day because I had no other choice, and also because sitting still was something I couldn't afford to do. I worked. I came home. I sat with Ren in her kitchen and drank tea and talked through the legal situation, and sometimes I cried, and sometimes I just sat there staring at the table. 3 months in, Ren said, "I've been thinking." I looked up. "You're good at what you do. You know that, right? The campaigns you've run, the clients you've brought in. You've been doing that for someone else's company for 5 years. What if you did it for yourself?" I told her I didn't have the money. I didn't have the energy. I didn't have anything. She pushed a notepad across the table toward me. She had already written down a few things: a number she could lend me, a contact she had at a small business center in Charlottesville, a name of a woman who had started a boutique marketing firm 2 years earlier and was looking for a partner. "You don't have to decide tonight," Ren said, "but I want you to know the option exists." I didn't decide that night. I thought about it for 2 weeks, during which the legal situation with Vivienne reached a point where my attorney told me we could settle or we could fight, and fighting would take another year and cost more than it was worth. I settled. I got less than I should have. I signed the papers and I sat in the parking lot outside my attorney's office in Richmond, and I thought about the word Philip had used for her once, in a rare, unguarded moment when they'd had a disagreement. He had said, "She always wins. That's just who she is." He'd said it with a kind of resigned affection, the way you talk about a law of physics. I thought, not anymore. I called the woman Ren had told me about. Her name was Tabitha, and she was 34 and direct and had a voice that made you immediately trust her. And we had coffee at a place on the downtown mall and talked for 3 hours. 2 weeks later, we had a partnership agreement. I gave notice at my job in Richmond, moved my things properly into Ren's guest room, and started showing up at Tabitha's home office every morning at 8. We called the firm Callaway and Cross. My last name, her last name. She wanted mine first, because she said I was bringing more to the table, which wasn't entirely true, but I loved her for saying it. The first year was hard in a way that doesn't have a simple word. I was grieving and building at the same time, which meant some days I was sharp and productive, and other days I sat in front of my laptop and couldn't write a single sentence. Tabitha covered for me more times than I can count. She never said anything about it. She just took the calls and sent the emails, and then the next day acted like it hadn't happened, and I did the same for her when her own life got complicated, which it did. We landed our first big client in month 7, a regional home goods chain looking to grow their digital presence. I ran the strategy. We delivered numbers they hadn't seen in 4 years. They renewed immediately. Word got around. By the end of year 2, we had a real office, 11 people on the team, more clients than we could take on at once, which meant we could afford to be selective. I had moved out of Ren's guest room and into an apartment in Charlottesville that I had chosen myself, in a neighborhood I liked, with a reading chair by the window that I had bought new, not secondhand, for the first time in my adult life. I wasn't over Philip. I don't think you get over someone like that. But I had built something that was mine, and every morning I drove to that office and walked through that door, I thought, no one handed me this. No one let me have this. I made this. Vivienne didn't know any of it. After the settlement, she had gone quiet. She sent me a formal note after the papers were signed, 2 lines wishing me well. The kind of note you write to a vendor when you end a contract. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. A year after we settled, I heard from a distant cousin of Philip's, a kind woman named Opal who had stayed in touch with me out of what I believed was genuine fondness, that Vivienne had sold the house. Downsizing, Opal said carefully, which meant it hadn't been a choice. Philip's father had passed away the year before Philip did, and apparently the family finances, which I had always assumed were solid, were more complicated than anyone had let on. I listened. I said I was sorry to hear it. I moved on with my day. What I didn't expect was a phone call. It came on a Thursday morning in March. I was at my desk going through a proposal when my cell phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered because I sometimes get calls from potential clients. June. Her voice was the same, measured, controlled. But something underneath it had shifted. Something had loosened, just slightly. I said, Vivienne. There was a pause. I wondered if we might be able to meet, she said. I have some things I'd like to discuss with you. I knew what it was before she said another word. I knew from the pause, from the way she chose the word discuss instead of something more demanding, from the fact that she was calling me at all. She was in trouble. I took a slow breath. Outside my office window, Charlottesville was doing what it does in early March, half pretending it's already spring, the trees just barely starting to think about blooming. I appreciate you calling, I said. I'm not available to meet. Another pause, longer this time. June, I understand that things between us weren't. Vivienne. I kept my voice even, not cold, just steady. I genuinely hope you're okay. I mean that. But I'm not in a position to help you, and I don't think a meeting would be good for either of us. She didn't say anything. Take care of yourself, I said. And I hung up. I sat there for a moment. Tabitha knocked on my office door frame and leaned in with a look that said she'd seen my face change through the glass wall. Everything good? I thought about it. I really did. Yeah, I said. Actually, yeah. I've thought about that phone call a lot in the time since. I've wondered whether I should have taken the meeting. Whether I should have been the bigger person, the more generous one. Whether Philip would have wanted me to. I've sat with that question on a lot of quiet nights. Here's where I've landed. Being generous doesn't always mean saying yes. I gave Philip 4 years of my whole heart. I stayed by his side through the fear of his diagnosis and the months when he was managing his medications and the nights when I could tell he was scared even when he said he wasn't. I brought flowers to his grave every year on his birthday. I loved him. What I don't owe is more sacrifice to the woman who handed me a cardboard box in the hallway 11 days after I buried him. Some people, when they hear this story, want to know if I feel guilty, if I feel like I won, if I feel like I got justice. I don't think of it that way. I think of the reading chair by my window. I think of Tabitha calling me at 7 in the morning because she's excited about a new client. I think of Wren's kitchen and the notepad she slid across the table and the way she believed in me before I believed in myself. I think of Philip, who knew me better than almost anyone, and who would have hated what his mother did, and who I think, I have to believe, would have been proud of what I made anyway. I didn't win against Vivienne. I just stopped letting her be the story. That's the difference. And some mornings, when the light comes through that window and falls across my desk and everything I built, I know exactly how much that difference weighs. It's everything. I still think about the cardboard box sometimes. Not with anger. Not anymore. Just with a kind of quiet clarity, the way you think about a moment that turned out to matter more than you knew it would at the time. Vivienne handed me that box, and I think she believed she was closing a door. What she actually did was force me to find one I never would have looked for on my own. That's the strange arithmetic of hard things. They cost you something real, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, what you build from the loss is worth more than what you lost. I don't think I would have called Tabitha if I hadn't been desperate. I don't think I would have sat across from her at that table on the downtown mall and said yes to something terrifying if I'd still had a house to go home to and a life that felt stable. Comfort has a way of making you patient with your own smallness. Losing everything in 11 days has a way of making you ruthless about what you actually want. What I know now that I didn't know then is that the people who try to diminish you are almost never as powerful as they seem in the moment. Vivienne had an attorney and a plan, and 4 years of carefully maintained distance from me. But she didn't have what I had, which was the particular kind of clarity that comes from having nothing left to protect. When you're not defending anything, you can move. And I moved. There's something I want to say carefully here, because I've heard people tell stories like mine and turn them into something triumphant in a way that feels false. I didn't win because I'm exceptional. I won, if that's even the right word, Because I made a choice every single morning to keep going. That's it. That's the whole secret. Ren slid a notepad across a table and I could have pushed it back. Tabitha offered me a partnership and I could have said I wasn't ready. Every door that opened, I had to choose to walk through it. And some mornings, I walked through it shaking. What kept me upright wasn't rage and it wasn't pride. It was something quieter. It was the understanding that how you treat people, even the ones who wronged you, is a reflection of who you are, not who they are. When Vivian called, I didn't hang up in anger. I was calm. I was honest. I wished her well and I meant it as much as I could. That mattered to me. It still does. And it was the discipline of showing up. Not inspired, not confident, not healed, just present. At my desk, at Tabitha's office, at Ren's kitchen table, there is a kind of intelligence that doesn't live in your head. It lives in your hands, in the habit of doing the next right thing, even when you can't see what comes after it. I built Callaway and Cross one client at a time. I rebuilt myself the same way, and the reading chair by my window, the one I bought new for the first time in my life, I sit in it some mornings before work, and I think about Philip, and I think about all of it, and I feel something that isn't quite peace, but is close enough. Close enough is a lot when you started from a cardboard box in a hallway.